Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode number 186. I am your host this week, Danny Blue, and with me as always is, not as always, but just Leon Revill.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you again, Danny.
It's good to see and talk to you too. And I didn't mean just Leon Revill, but it is just the two of us this week, where we're going to be chatting about kind of how we got our start in the web development community in general. Like how did we end up on the show? How did we end up choosing this as a career? All those types of things. But before we get into that, Leon, would you like to handle This Week in Web?
I would love to. Thank you, Danny. So first of all, yesterday, Google has revealed its new Stadia platform. I'm not quite sure exactly how you're supposed to pronounce it. And it's a new gaming service where basically you'll be able to play AAA titles with full graphics, full maxed out graphics from your browser, Chromebook, PC, mobile device, and TV. So it looks like a really cool service, and it's kind of shows off the capabilities that the web has nowadays, it was just amazing to see. So I really hope that we get to try that soon. And Danny Blue, that's you, has just released a new article on dependency injection. So if you want to learn how dependency injection works in frameworks such as Angular by building an injector, then take a look at Danny's article and find out how. Last week we got Chrome 73, and that included PWA support for macOS, and that now means that we have PWA support across all of the major desktop and mobile platforms, which is a great milestone to see. We can really see that technology picking up now. And finally, something I've not actually tried yet. So there's a new tool called Pika Package, which is the new bundling tool, and it basically installs Node modules that run natively in the browser, aiming to get you a less complex and faster web app. So like I said, I've not actually tried that out yet, but it looks really interesting, so I wanted to share it anyway. So go and check that out and give us your feedback. And that's everything from me for This Week in Web.
Thank you, Justin. I am interested in the Google Stadia announcement, because this is not the first time this is something like this has come up. There was OnLive back in the day. Sony had actually even purchased a company called Gaikai, and they use that technology now for their PlayStation Now stuff. But there's not been a really successful game streaming service. So I'm very interested to see, with the power of, pretty much just the technology of somebody like a Google, exactly what that looks like. I imagine, you'll still need a pretty high speed internet connection, of course, but but I'm anxious to try it out, see how it works.
Yeah, certainly. So kind of moving on to our topics of how we got into web development. So we always ask that guests when they come on, we say kind of, how did you get into your career and those kind of things. So we kind of thought it'd be fun to discuss amongst ourselves kind of how we ended up here and doing what we're doing. So I think it'd be great if you, Danny, could kind of start us off and kind of give us a bit of background of kind of where you started in like the computing world and then into web development.
Sure. So I've probably given a brief spiel about how I got into this stuff in the past, but so it's like I remember at first thinking that I was always really interested in computers, but I always thought that it's something that I was not smart enough to do. I don't really know why I thought that. There was no person in my life that was like, no, you can't do that.
I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, I just assumed it's something you needed to be, super really gifted in math or something like that. So I never really checked it out. I know some of my friends did C++ classes in high school. And I remember in middle school or something being really impressed, where there was a friend's brother or whatever who knew how to quote unquote talk to the computer, which pretty much meant use the command line. Because when I first started, I had no idea what that stuff was, because I'm not old enough to be like, oh, like the Commodore 64 era. So it was like, you know, like Windows, not Windows 95 is the one that I remember the most. I remember upgrading to Windows 95 and that being a big deal. And then I was a big, so when I went to college, I didn't think about that as a thing that I could, that was really an option. I wanted to do more design work. So I found a really good school in my state called Fairmont State University. They have a pretty good uh, graphic design program, and so that's where I ended up going. Now through that program, I got a chance to learn, you know, some kind of, you know, like some fine, you know, like I took some fine art classes. I took a sculpting class. I took,
Cool.
did I take pottery? No, I didn't take pottery, but I did take sculpture and some other art classes like that. And then I also took a few programming classes. So as part of the design curriculum, you would learn some web design. So we were using you know, the entire Adobe suite. We were using Dreamweaver
Oh, yes.
for some things, but Dreamweaver is how I was first introduced to HTML and CSS, specifically, not really any JavaScript at this point, but HTML and CSS. So I was like, oh, this is how web pages are kind of constructed and things like that. And then the first taste on the coding side was actually Flash, and it was Flash 2 at the time. I think Flash 3 had just come out. But I had a Flash class where we learned how to do animation. So, you know, we took some of the more fine art stuff, and, you know, like the final project was a Flash movie. So, you know, how to, you know, like, so how to set up all of your animations, how to do some pretty cool art. And there was some people did some really cool stuff, much better than I did, came out of that. And then there was a second semester of that Flash course. And at the very beginning, the instructor said, you know, I can either continue to teach you more stuff about, you pretty much build directly off of the previous class, or I'll teach you how to make games. And so, of course, everybody in the class was like, oh, well, teach us how to make games. Obviously, that is the better choice that you're giving us. And so that was really my very first introduction to any sort of programming, was building small Flash games. And I did that for class, and then I also did that outside of class just for fun. I'll try to find them if I can. I might be able to dig one of them up somewhere. And from there, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And there was another person in that class that said, oh, well, this actually reminds me a lot of JavaScript that I learned in, you know, something else from some other people. And I was like, oh, okay. So that was the first time I had ever heard of JavaScript. And then as part of my other electives, I ended up taking some light web development courses that, again, were more just HTML and CSS, not just, but more focused on HTML and CSS. I took a Visual Basic course. So I learned some Microsoft Visual Basic. I remember even the test, like it was really bizarre. Like the final test we took for that class wasn't even on a computer. It was just pencil and paper. You had to fill in the code. It was a bit of a disaster. Yeah, but ultimately I learned, I don't remember anything about Visual Basic, but what I do remember is having the realization of, oh, this looks an awful lot like Flash. There are for loops, there are if statements, there are variables. And so that was my first understanding that it's like, oh, these concepts are the same. The syntax is different. So that was actually pretty important. And then I got my first job out of college at a swimming pool manufacturer in Jane Lou, West Virginia, which is there's nothing out there. But I was working in the marketing department, and the job was to do a good bit of print design work. So a lot of banners, posters, brochures, a ton of that type of stuff. But also to work on their websites. They were all just static HTML and CSS.
So before this point, had you made the decision that this is what I want to do as a career, or were you still not kind of made that decision yet?
No, not at all. I was going to be like a graphic designer. That's what I
Right.
wanted.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do. So in this first particular job, it was, oh, there's also web stuff. So it was a lot of, web design, and then just HTML and CSS implementation. So, and this was everything. So there was no CMS or anything that backed it. So a lot of it just ended up being updating copy and stuff like that. Nothing really, nothing really exciting. But then we had another uh, another person join the team who is a man a good bit older than I am, and especially how like especially when you're younger, the age differences seem more severe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of how it was. And this guy's named Daniel Marshall, who I'm still in touch with at various points now. And when he joined, he was like, "We're throwing away not the code, but don't use Dreamweaver anymore. Um, Learn how to do all of the HTML and CSS by hand. Don't count on the tool doing it for you. Uh, here's this code editor called Notepad++. That's where we're going to do everything." So I was like, okay. And so that's how I learned how to do that stuff. Is mostly that he made me. um, and I actually found it's like, oh, I'm actually for whatever reason, I'm enjoying this quite a bit. And that's also where JavaScript first came up for me. So I bought two books, one on JavaScript and then one on JavaScript and jQuery. And I just started reading them. And I was like, oh, I understand. So to point out, at this point, I did not know how to include a JavaScript file into an HTML document. I had no idea how that worked. So I remember struggling through that quite a bit. But ultimately, it came up that we wanted to do just various interactive things for some of our marketing pages. I feel like I remember one of the first ones being just this little slide out panel. So I wanted to click on the button and then have the thing slide out. That's all I wanted to do. And so I got that working with the jQuery animate, the jQuery animates function. What else? We did some other. It was also the first time doing anything specifically for mobile. So because there were some very light like landing pages for scan a QR code, we wanted to take you to a specific landing page for stuff. So learning how it's like, different viewport stuff, seeing how that worked. And I just ended up so that was my first taste into like, oh, this is really cool. This is the stuff that I want to do. But I still didn't really consider myself a developer.
Yep.
The next job is where that started to take hold, where I worked as a UI developer, I guess was my title. And it was some internal project management software, but it was .NET based, and the first, still doing mostly design work, but I was also doing all of the fundamental UI implementation. So again, I started using more and more things. We were using Kendo UI. So that was my first experience in something like that. This is also the first time that I had heard about a single page application. I remember being in some sort of live stream that they were doing, and they mentioned single page application. They had some framework that they were demoing. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I pretended that I did, because it's very important to always pretend you know what you're talking about. That's not true. That's not actual advice. But yeah, and then I would say and even then I was like, I was starting to build more things. So I built an Android application using PhoneGap, Cordova, just some other things like that, figuring out how to build jQuery plugins. And then I unfortunately got laid off from that job. But being laid off from that job is actually probably one of the more pivotal points in my career.
Yeah.
Because what happened then was I started obviously interviewing right away, and I interviewed for a lot. I interviewed for a lot of jobs. And one of the things that I realized from each interview that I went to is that it's like, there is so much that I don't know.
Yeah.
And so at first that was actually a little bit scary,
Yeah, of course.
Because like at this point, it's like this is what I think I want to do, but they keep asking me, like if I've heard of these different frameworks like Ember, and I'm like, I have no idea what that is. And my fundamentals were lacking. So remember, up to this point, I had on all fronts, on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, I kind of stumbled my way into a lot of the stuff that I was at. So I took that. So I was out of work for not very long, for a couple of months. But what I did was I spent that entire time, and I was like, I'm going to learn these things. So I think it's called Code School. I don't remember the name of it. I will find the name and I will put it in the show notes.
Cool.
But it was, something that was like $10 a month or something like that. And I was like, I'm going to spend my time doing all this. And I did. And I learned, like real fundamentals of JavaScript, like, like
And
how the
did you find
prototype
that
chain
really
works.
that really helped like interviews as well?
Oh, enormously.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was I learned more, because I don't want to say like I studied interview questions, but I fundamentally knew more. Like I had a problem. So like I had issues where, like I wasn't totally clear what was vanilla JavaScript and what was part of jQuery, right? Like those
Hmm.
two things for
Yeah.
me were all kind of one thing. Which, rightfully so, raised some red flags with folks. So as I kept going, I just kept learning more, figuring out things like, oh, this is how the event loop works in the browser. This is how the prototype chain works. This is why you should do certain things, at different things at different times, and just developing some more fundamentals, how to compose functions, a lot of things like that. And after that is when I started working as a front end engineer at Deloitte Digital earlier on, and pretty much from there, it's kind of just my trajectory in terms of I want to be like I want to
Yeah.
be a web developer really took off. And again, it's largely thanks to meeting a bunch of other really, really smart people out there. People that are, like one of the reasons I'm actually going back to Deloitte Digital now. It's because one of my best friends, Aaron Druck, still works there. My friend Cody, who I still talk to, play board games with quite a bit. He was there and he taught me a ton of stuff. So that's really how it ended up. It's almost just a bunch of fortuitous events, or how I got to that point.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. Like it's always interesting to hear people's stories and kind of you pick up similar points throughout the stories that kind of relate to kind of your own story.
Yeah.
jQuery comes up a lot, and Dreamweaver comes up a lot, and even for me at least, like the whole graphics side of stuff kind of comes up, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to think about, especially coming in now, because I never would have thought that I even wanted to do this back in high school or something like
Yeah.
that, because I was like that. Because just for whatever reason, I assumed that I was not smart enough to do it. And I am, I am obviously proof that you don't necessarily need to be super smart to do this. Um, but you just don't know. And in a lot of cases, I just met the right people. I had I had really good mentors, and yeah, I like to think I'm at least okay at this now. So it is it is really interesting, especially, I talk to quite a few people now coming out of coding boot camps and that kind of stuff, folks that are having a change in career, or kids, versus kids coming out of school who are like, this is, like, I knew this is what I wanted to do. I've just decided to focus in web or native app development, or something like that. It's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all there is for the rest is history, as they say. I've like I've been enjoying doing the podcast for the past number of years. Try to contribute to open source. So yeah. So what about you, Leon? What is your story? How did you end up here?
Well, so it kind of really started, when I was a young kid. Getting into computers really was all about gaming, really. Computer games. Never really had a games console until uh, this Christmas, actually, believe it or not, I've always been into PC gaming, and when I was a lot younger, that was kind of the thing to do, and that was what piqued my interest initially in computers just in general. And it was a while until we kind of got the internet. I lived in a really small village, so with you know telephone lines and all that kind of stuff, it was one of the last places to get an actual internet connection. So when we finally got that, and opening up the world to multiplayer gaming and all those other kind of cool things, and browsing the internet, I found myself spending a lot of time on like forums, talking about games, learning new strategies, and all those other kind of things. And one of the things I noticed is that all these different people on these forums had these really cool, what I now know as the forum signatures. These really cool images underneath their names where they'd have their handle on, with like these really cool graphics or pictures or whatever. And I was like, how do people create those? Like, how do you do that? I want one. And that kind of got me into kind of learning Photoshop and learning how to create different kind of like graphics, but do some graphics design, and that was really interesting, and I really enjoyed that. But it wasn't very long until I wanted to do more. I wanted to create my own forum around a particular game, and build some online communities and those kind of things. So then I started to kind of read a bit about the technologies of, like, how to build a website, that kind of basic stuff. And I remember this, and I kind of think, like, what were you thinking? But I literally printed out pretty much as much from W3 schools as I could on physical paper, so I could sit on the bus on the way to school. So this must have been when I was 11 years old or something, and read through W3 schools and how to do HTML and CSS like on paper while I'm on my way to and from school, which sounds ridiculous nowadays. But that's kind of how I learned to do kind of a little bit of kind of web design, really. Again, nothing really kind of JavaScript related at this point. So kind of that went on for in terms of like building little gaming websites, or a few little forums and those kind of things, and that led into PHP, and kind of just learning how to do some things a bit more kind of server driven. Again, to build a proper forum, you need the kind of back end stuff. So learning a lot of PHP, which would generate the HTML and those kind of things, was kind of where I started out at first. And that kind of got to the point where wanting to do more interactive things, like what you mentioned in the kind of in your marketing role, and that's kind of what kind of led me to jQuery. But even at this point, I'd never really ever considered doing this as a career, like doing that as a career. It's just something I kind of played around with kind of in my own time. So when I left school, I went to college and did kind of a generic computing course. I knew I liked computing. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So and college isn't the same as university or college like it is in the States. It's just like a 2-year thing you do after school before you go to university. So I did a couple of years, just did some like generic computing stuff. And during those 2 years, I decided that I wanted to do computer networks. So again, back to the whole kind of gaming theme, I really liked, setting up LAN games and all the networking stuff around that. So I decided, all right, what I want to do for a career is computer networks. That sounds like fun. So I ended up starting a degree, Bachelor of Science in Computer Networks, which is quite far away from web development or programming in general. I think most people on that course absolutely hated programming and couldn't stand it. But I kind of got a chance to do a few like programming modules, did some C# and those kind of things, which was really my first kind of serious look at doing proper programming. And did a web development module. And learned a lot more JavaScript. Built a few JavaScript games. Really jQuery at this point, to be honest. It was really kind of jQuery was kind of the way you did it then, wasn't it? It was so much more capable than vanilla JavaScript at the time, and certainly solved all of those problems around having to write different quirks for different platforms and stuff. So again, even at that point, I had no intention of doing web development as a career. And as part of my degree, degrees over here are particularly 3 years, but this one was 4 years, because the third year you basically had to get a job and get some like practical experience before you could graduate. And over here we had a recession at that particular point, and nobody was hiring, especially not like interns. So myself and one of my good friends on the course decided we'll start a business. We'll start like an IT support business, networking business, and kind of do that for a year and get some experience that way, which is really good fun. and we doing IT support, computer support, and that kind of stuff for like local businesses and things. But one of the things that kept on coming up quite a lot, speaking to these small businesses, was we want a website. Do you know anybody? And I was like, well, I can do that for you. I've been doing it for years. So kind of ended up doing more and more on that, and realized quite quickly that was making much more money than what the actual IT support was. And I kind of realized I really like doing this. It was just simple websites, like, just standard business websites where you'd have like an about page and a contact page. And, not really knowing much, I'd build it all from scratch myself. I'd build a PHP backend with a database if it needed it. I'd use that Bootstrap CSS framework, and use jQuery to do any kind of interactory and that kind of stuff, kind of really that simple stuff. Not really at this point, not had a chance to kind of work with anybody else that had a lot of experience. I was all just discovering it myself and trying to figure out how to do things. So of course I wasn't using best practices and just bumbling through it really, but creating things good enough that people wanted to pay me for. And it's at that point that I kind of thought, I really like doing this. This is something I want to do all day, every day, and I'd be quite happy, to make a career out of it. So I left the business and got a full-time web development job, working for a company called Education City, which was a kind of a small company in the UK who delivered like interactive learning material to primary school children throughout the UK, and they had various kind of internal systems that, to manage a lot of this content and data and stuff. So that was my first kind of forte into doing it professionally, and I learned so much in that job. I learned so much in terms of learning from people. Obviously, they've been doing it a lot longer than I had, learning best practices, and that was the first time I kind of discovered JavaScript frameworks and realized that there was more to JavaScript than just jQuery, and this is something that I really needed to learn more about, understand the differences, understand how JavaScript's in the browser and how the browser works properly, and all those other kind of things, which is kind of when I really got kind of stuck into it. And then from there, I decided I just wanted to learn more, experience more. From there, got a job doing something quite similar. From there, moved into the job that I'm at now, doing like mobile based web apps and those kind of things. So that's it really. I mean, not a particularly exciting story, but again, it's interesting how you kind of don't really think about this from the beginning, or at least we didn't anyway. And then you just kind of stumble into it, realizing, oh, I like this. Let's do this. Let's get people to pay me money to do this. This is the ace.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think that's pretty cool, and I think a lot of folks end up with similar stories to what you were talking about with the forum signatures, being like, oh, I want to do that. How do I do that? That's the way a lot of this type of stuff starts, and just having that curiosity of, I want that. How do I get it? Is really fascinating. I mean, I'm sure there are quite a few people that got their start thanks to thanks to MySpace worms and that kind of stuff. And it's like, oh, I want to do, I would like to. That's interesting. I want to play a prank on my friends. How do I do that? Yeah. It's really cool. It doesn't need to be a lot. Now, with that, we just talked about how we got into it. Do you think it's more difficult to get into now? So, and I don't want to get into a super deep debate about the current state of web development or anything like that, but just in general, do you think that even just the way people interact with websites and web applications now, do you think it's more difficult for people to kind of stumble into it the way that you and I did?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, kind of when we were starting out, we're a similar age. I suspect we kind of did all this stuff kind of similar times. It's web development was very much like a business facing website. Really, obviously you had a lot of interactivity on Flash websites, but kind of standard HTML websites, there wasn't that much involved really. There's a few like you said, slide out menus and those kind of things, but there wasn't anything at that point that was kind of like a proper application that does a lot of stuff. There wasn't a huge amount of logic on the front end, at least. Of course, there was a lot of stuff kind of going on the back end. But nowadays, it's not only that there's so many more different things to learn and understand how they work. There's so much more expected from it, just a standard website, like a normal website, not a web application, just a normal website. There's so much more expectation around what it can do and how it works and what platforms it can run on, different screen sizes. On one side of things, the the browser story's got a lot better today. So you're not having to support the IE6s and all the different quirks off so many old different browsers that don't have the same APIs and those kind of things. So that's got much better. But at the same time, there's so many more new challenges because of how complex everything seems to have got. So I think it must be quite daunting. Like if I kind of imagined, waking up tomorrow and completely forgotten everything, like the thought of having to relearn everything and understand how all these different things work that we kind of just kind of naturally kind of grown into, I think it must be quite difficult. Which I think a lot of these code camps and those kind of things play nicely into that. To kind of the most difficult thing, and we talk about it a lot on the show, is kind of knowing what to learn. Given what you want to do, what is it that I actually need to learn? And without some guidance from like a code camp or some kind of training, I think it's impossible. Like you're just like, there's all this stuff. I've got no idea what any of it means or how any of it is relevant to what I want to do ultimately. Like, where do you begin? And I think that's a difficult thing to kind of get over initially.
And I mean, you even look at you all talked to Surma from Google last week or a couple weeks ago about Houdini, and like just like listening to, I'm still really upset I couldn't be on that episode, but like just listening to that type of stuff versus the like, I don't know, like I want something to happen when I click this button, which is, I feel like where a lot of it starts. Like there's so much more that you can learn. And like you don't necessarily have to. You don't have to know most of it, actually. You don't need to have an in-depth, like you don't need to have in-depth knowledge of, but right, like you said, if you don't have some sort of guidance right off the bat, that can be really intimidating. Which brings me to actually another question for you, and then I'm going to see if I can think of an answer too. So if you were somebody that wanted to get started now, I mean, not even necessarily as a career, right? This is just, I would like to mess around with stuff. Where should somebody, what is one of the first things you think somebody should look at?
I think for sure, like any of the online training kind of boot camp type things, not necessarily paid for ones. I'm like, for example, there's plenty of free training around how to get started with web development and how to get started with a particular framework. I know at least Google had free courses on, I think it was Code School at the time, around Angular and those kind of things. But just going for something like that, just to kind of get a taste of what it was all about, and from there try and get an understanding as to which bits you like the thought of, and kind of take it from there, really, just as a starting point. Luckily, there's so much kind of content available online and so many great resources, but it really is figuring out what to start with, I think, is the important bit.
Yeah, in my opinion, I totally agree with you. I think you should focus on the first things that you can see results for.
Yep.
And this is specifically if you want to get started. And like, now what those results are, may depend, person to person. So, like if, say you're like, oh, I'm interested in putting things on the web, but I'm more interested in, like, I don't know, algorithms or something like that because I was good at math or something like that.
Yeah.
In school, that's one way to see results, but figure out how you can see results for that type of stuff. If it's, like a lot of it can just start with build yourself a website for something. And that can be as simple as just HTML and CSS on a page, but taking something from, I have nothing. I have a blank code editor and a domain, and I can now put something into the code editor and then get it onto my domain so that when I go to dannyblue.com, something shows up. Is like, that's a really good feeling. Like, and to me, that's one of the biggest, like exciting things about front end development or even just application development immediately is I wrote some words on the screen and now they're appearing as something an entirely different concept over here. And that is a really cool thing. And if that really grabs you, that's where I think you may end up, you may have found something that you would really enjoy. Maybe not as a career at all. Maybe just as a hobby, or so that you can build a fan site for, like for some show that you like and you want to share your own theories.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of really attracted me to web development was kind of how accessible it is from a developer standpoint, but also from a user standpoint. So literally, you could spend a weekend in your basement building something, and by the weekend after, it could have gone viral, and thousands of people from all around the world could be using it. And that, like, there isn't many platforms that would allow somebody with no money, just a little bit of time and a little bit of knowledge to be able to do that. And that is what fascinated with me with that the prospect of being able to do something like that. And I think that's what's so attractive about web development, and especially now with how capable the web is. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree.
So I think it'd be quite interesting to chat a little bit about. So we talked about some of the barriers or some of the differences in getting into web development now compared to when we got into web development. But it'd be good to think just to chat about, just to kind of finish up, where we think web development as a career or as a job is kind of going, given the new capabilities, given the new complexities, given the new platforms and all those other kind of things. Just chat a bit about that and about where you think, what you think it will mean to be a web developer in 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so it's an interesting question because obviously nobody knows.
Yeah.
But if you look at, say, when we were first starting, you were talking about like, oh, I was getting paid to build these really simple business sites with, just some contact information and, and the design. It's nobody really gets paid for just that stuff anymore. There are all these other tools, there are things like Wix and
Yeah.
Squarespace. There are
Yeah.
just a lot of other options, because honestly, if anybody asks me now, like if I have a family member ask me, it's like, we need a website built, and I'd be like, I would go to one of those. And I thought I would never suggest one of those because I'm like, oh, it's
Yeah.
not going to
Sure.
be as
Yeah.
good or something like that. But they're amazing and they're
Yeah.
really, really good tools. But but web development as a job didn't go away. It just changed.
Hmm.
And it got more specific. I think it's going to be more of, it's weird. It's almost just like the things that you were talking about, what your website or application or whatever is expected to do, goes up. And I think some of that will just continue. Like, in This Week in Web, you're talking about, we have PWA support across, like the major desktop browsers now, and as well as mobile. That's huge. I freaking love desktop PWAs way more than
Hmm.
I actually thought I would. The Spotify desktop PWA experience is exactly what I think installing an app, the experience of installing an application should be. You go to the website and you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Oh, I can just listen to music here. Oh, cool. It told me that
Yeah.
and then it says, like in Spotify has a little thing and they say, hey, if you want to, you can go ahead and install this and you can keep us around. And I was like, okay, yes, I will. And that was the whole experience is just far more organic
Hmm.
than go to the website, download the installer, then run the installer. Not to get into more of that, but I think the expectations are just going to go up. I think, at a certain point it will be expected that most, you know, uh, more complicated applications will give you an option to install them,
Yep.
and the complexities that come around that. So I think it's just going to change. Now, I also am very curious about how AI and machine learning will relate to some of this stuff. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
because it's entirely possible that a lot of certain things will be automated. Certain types of tasks will be automated away. And if you look at that now, that's with our tools. It always goes that way, where you do as much as you can. So you take repetitive tasks. This is literally what computers are for. You find repetitive tasks and you build, and you find a way to do all those. Let the computer do those, and then you don't have to do them anymore.
Then move on to something else.
Exactly. And depending on what the repetitive task is if the computer is more capable of understanding the problem area, um, there are other things that AI might do for you as well. Like I wouldn't be surprised if something like, if there ended up being something like Wix or Squarespace, like I said before, where you just kind of give it your requirements and it gives you a couple of options of here are 4 applications that I've built. Do any, like, do these meet
Yeah.
your criteria? And you're just like, yes, number 4 does. I'll take that, and that's my thing. So I don't know. But their AI and machine learning always give a little bit of, I mean, you even look at, oh no, I forgot whose project it was, where they were talking about doing, like, creating your chunks for your lazy loaded bundles, based off of like Google Analytics,
Yeah, I
so that
remember
it could,
seeing that. Yeah,
yeah, and that type of stuff is really, really, really fascinating. So
yeah,
I think, as always, I think a lot more stuff is going to go that way. I think things like WebAssembly are going to become more important. I think they're going to become more invisible than you really expect. Like, I don't think
hmm
everybody is going to need to know how to, write anything in, write Rust or C++ or anything, but I think they're going to be more, you know, mo- you know, it can be easier to install those and run your own project the same way. It's like, oh, I need to find a jQuery plugin for this. Oh, I'll find an existing C library that handles this for me.
yeah. I think the kind of web development as a whole is going to have more layers to it. So kind of when we started out, there was kind of 2 layers. There was kind of like back end and front end. Loosely, that was the 2 layers of things that you could do. But kind of now with the different capabilities that the platform all around offers, I think you're going to have things like, so obviously you'll have back end development, but as part of that, you're probably going to have some kind of machine learning and AI kind of perspective. Then on maybe more on the front end, you've then got the web development side of it, building the JavaScript applications. Then you've also kind of got the lower level, WebAssembly route where you're building much kind of lower level complex logic into the application alongside things like Houdini and all those other kind of things. So I feel like because of how capable the platform is on all areas now, there's going to be many more layers to it than what it kind of has been in the past, and there's going to be more individual specialities kind of in that stack. I think is where it could go, but who knows? We
Yeah.
don't know what's going to happen. I think it's fascinating how far-reaching it is. For even JavaScript. I mean, that when we started out, JavaScript was not something you built stuff on the back end or on on small chips on IoT
Yeah.
devices. I mean, IoT wasn't even a thing back then. It's so much more. It's available in so many places, which makes the whole job so much more attractive because you can learn one thing, JavaScript, for example, and you can you as a developer, you've pretty much got the capability and the knowledge to build nearly anything. I'm not saying that JavaScript is the best tool for anything. Obviously, there's better tools in certain situations, but just by learning that one thing, you can do so much more than what we ever used to be able to do, which is really cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of folks it's a very easy kind of a cop out statement to make, but ultimately, like, if you want to prepare, just prepare for the future. Just be open to learning new things. If you're a React developer or an Angular developer now, like, if that's where you've specialized, just be open to learning new things. This doesn't mean you need to, 'cause there's only so many hours in the day and people have families and hobbies and other things other than software, but it's just being open to change. Like, if somebody
Yeah,
new joins your team, they're like, I have an idea. Listen, because they have different experiences doing different things, and that, being open to new ideas and being open to different standards and just different ways of building software, uh, you'll I feel like you'll stick around much, much longer if you're prepared to do that, because you don't get
yeah,
stuck in your own little walled garden.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And don't forget the robot uprising is inevitable anyway. So just
No, that's true. So who cares?
enjoy it while you can.
Absolutely. Uh, well, Leon, do you think there's anything that we didn't talk about in this particular thing? Are there any other exciting tidbits that you wish to share about your own personal journey into web development?
I wrote a jQuery book once. That was a thing.
That's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, no,
Yeah, no. How about yourself?
no, I don't think so. I think that's it. I don't think there's anything. I didn't build anything really cool. To this point, I don't I don't know if ever. But yeah,
Oh, that's
no,
not true.
I definitely
Cool.
didn't. If I can that Flash game that I built, I actually still really enjoyed this. I if I can find that, I'm sure I can't find the source files, but I really wonder if I can find the um SW. I don't remember the file extension.
Ace. And
Yeah,
for anybody listening, if they have any interesting stories on how they got started or what you think is going to change for web development kind of moving forward as a job and a career, please shoot us up on Twitter. We'd love to hear feedback from people who are listening and kind of hear their thoughts and their kind of stories as well. Please do.
yeah.
Please, please speak to us.
And if we see any particular interesting stories, maybe we will share them on the show.
Definitely.
All right, Leon. Well, it's been a pleasure to pod with you with this intimate one-on-one fireside chat. Um, yeah, this has been really cool. I do enjoy hearing about how different people got here. And we may try to do this again, not with Leon and I, but there are other wonderful people on this show that you all know and love. So Amal, Justin, Eric, try to get them out here to tell their stories. Especially Justin's. We're both very, very interested to hear Justin's because, as far as
Yeah,
I know, he's done everything.
absolutely everything.
We might need a special episode just for Justin.
About 3 hours.
All right, Leon. Well, thank you very much. This has been an absolute blast, and thank you everybody for listening.